much. We now move to my good friend, the distinguished Vice Chairman of the committee, Mr. Burgess.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to take, before we get to the business of the day, probably within the last hour, that meeting down at the White House has wrapped up, and I don't know how it turned out or what to expect on the discussions of the debt limit, but I do know this, Mr. Chairman. Without your stewardship of getting that bill, the Limit, Save, and Grow bill, through the Rules Committee and onto the floor, they wouldn't be having that discussion. Amen. So incredibly important to get that bill passed 2 weeks ago. That gives me optimism that H.R. 1, having such a good position now in getting the debt limit discussions going, H.R. 2 can perhaps have an equal amount of gas in the tank for getting a border security bill or border security under discussion. Mr. Jordan, I don't want to imply that I wasn't listening, but maybe I wasn't listening as carefully as I should have been as you started your remarks. You gave us a recitation of some numbers of what this country has seen in the last 2.5 years.
Yeah, but just the last weekend, 26,072 hours in one sector in Texas. So 5 million over the 28 months of the Biden administration. So you could go on and on. But the big number.
Let me just stop you there. 5 million over the months of the Biden administration. Mm-hmm. Is anyone aware of a comparable situation in any country where 5 million people in 2 years and a little more have been infused into the population? I mean, and that's on top of, we normally take in what, 1.1 million people legally each year?
Yeah. Yeah, and I will tell you about one of the sheriffs who testified at a hearing. He said 28 years of law enforcement. He's a sheriff on the border in Arizona. He said he's never seen it this bad. In 28 years, he's never seen it this bad. And frankly, he said in the previous administration, it was as good as he's ever seen it. So in 28 years of law enforcement on our southern border, he says right now it's as bad as it's ever been.
Bad or worse. And then here is the problem and why it's so critically important that people see a seriousness about a border security bill. In 48 hours, what has been untenable may become astonishing in its level.
Good point.
And we've seen the drone pictures of people that are sort of waiting their time to, because of this notion that when Title 42 expires, there really will be no limits on the amount of people that can come into this country. Is that correct? Yeah,
and the one other thing, when you have that volume of folks coming across the border, coming into our nation, there are going to be some bad people. And we know of 200 on the terrorist watch list. And never forget, a year ago when Secretary Mayorkas was in front of the Judiciary Committee, we asked him a question. At the time, it was only 42, I believe. Now it's 200. At the time, 42, we said, what are the status of those individuals? And you may remember his answer, because everyone watching remembered. He said, I don't know. He didn't know if they were detained. He didn't know where they're. And you're coming from the Judiciary Committee as the Secretary of Homeland Security, security of the nation. You should know the status of the 42 individuals who are on the terrorist watch list, and he did it. And now that number is 5 times what it was at the time that he testified.
So one of the other things that's being discussed currently down on the border is will be the inability of the NGOs to handle the number of people that are dropped off at their locations. Now, historically, I mean, multiple trips down to McAllen, I've seen it over and over and over again where a notice to appear is given and the folks are dropped off at Sacred Heart Church in downtown McAllen. They're given a fanny pack with a bottle of water and a bus ticket, and good luck to you. But now those NGOs will be overwhelmed. Catholic Charities will be overwhelmed. And basically, people will just be turned loose on the street corners and hope to catch a bus somewhere. Has there been any discussion, either in Judiciary or Homeland Security, about how that's going to be handled? What's going to be the mechanism of control on the streets of those border communities? Either one of you.
You used the right word, Doctor. The word is overwhelmed, and that's what's happening. And now the Biden administration is talking about, and Secretary Marks is talking about.
If I could, they're overwhelmed now.
Yeah.
In 48 hours, in
worse.
a week's time, it's going to be astonishing at the level.
The president did you know, you're sending 1,500 military down there to process. But again, what
Yeah,
the
and if, let me
president,
interrupt you there.
Yeah.
And my governor said 1,500, and these
Yeah.
are people with pencils in their hand to.
that's correct.
to
They're
take
there to
notes.
process people. They're not there to stop anyone. And that just encourages more.
And that number should be 15,000 or 50,000 with enforcement capabilities. Instead, these are cleриcal
They're
personnel.
processors, yes.
So, was,
Add to the incentive.
yeah, and really that's really what's so worrisome. And Mr. Jordan, Chairman Jordan, you referenced a term that a lot of people may not be familiar with, and we know from past experience there are so many people that hang on the televised Rules Committee hearings. But can you explain the Darien Gap to people who might not know?
It's in
what the Darien
Panama, it's where they
Gap
come
is?
through, and it's and they're already massing there, so, you know, and we've all seen the caravans of folks coming, and, you know, look, we all say we don't fault anyone for wanting to get to the greatest country ever, but you gotta do it legally, you gotta do it the right way, and you gotta have an administration that understands that, and this one doesn't.
But the Darien Gap is that area of real estate that exists south of Panama, between Panama,
Yep.
the Isthmus of Panama, and South America. But it is also some of the most ungoverned and lawless and dangerous real estate
Yep.
on the face of the earth. Is that not correct?
Yeah, I've not been there personally, but we've had members go down there and see for themselves. I think Chairman Green has been there, but yeah, that's what we're talking about. And their estimates are now thousands are already massing there to make the trek, and the burdensome and troublesome trek for north.
Well, again, the policies and what this administration has followed has only exacerbated the problem, and it's fixing to get worse on a level that I don't think anyone really can adequately anticipate.